by God's grace, the Lord opened up his understanding to be able to harmonize these things. And the way we harmonize it is to understand that Jeconias, called here Jehoiachin, was in a co-regency. He was reigning along with his father, Jehoiakim. We have to understand the situation at that time. Good King Josiah is killed in battle. The Egyptians are the ones, first of all, who are oppressing Judah. And the Egyptians take away the next king, Jehoaz, after he reigns for 3 months. And then Jehoiakim is set up. And already they're like a puppet state of Egypt. Egypt has the authority over them. And so Jehoiakim decides to make his 8-year-old son, Jehoiachin, or Jeconias, the one in the genealogy, co-regent. Now it just means that, officially he would be king. I'm sure. I'm trying to keep their names straight. Jehoiakim would have been the chief ruler, and he would have just been teaching his son, trying to show him the ways of ruling over Judah as much as possible that you can show an 8-year-old for 10 years. For 10 years. Because Jehoiakim reigned 11 years, and it would have been in 608 BC, after that first year, he makes Jeconias co-regent, and then until 598 they rule together officially. But then Jehoiakim is taken away, and Jeconias assumes the throne all by himself for how long? 3 months and 10 days. 3 months and 10 days. And at that point, he's 18 years old, because it's now 10 years into the rule, but the Bible is accurate in saying he ruled only for 3 years, or 3 months, 10 days, because it was his father who was really ruling throughout the co-regency of the 10 years. Well, then following the 3 months and 10 days where he's ruling alone, he is carried away captive. And we can see this, let's see if we go to Jeremiah chapter 20, I think, Jeremiah 20. And no, that's not the one for Jeconiah. Jeconiah. Well, we'll read this. Jeremiah 20, verses 4 and 5. For thus saith Jehovah, behold, I will make thee a terror to thyself and to all thy friends, and they shall fall by the sword of their enemies, and thine eyes shall behold it. And I will give all Judah into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he shall carry them captive into Babylon, and shall slay them with the sword. Moreover, I will deliver all the strength of this city, and all the labors thereof, and all the precious things thereof, and all the treasures of the kings of Judah will I give into the hand of their enemies, which shall spoil them and take them and carry them to Babylon. And then in Jeremiah 27, let's see if that's it. Jeremiah 27, starting in verse 20. It says, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, took not when he carried away captive Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, from Jerusalem to Babylon, and all the nobles of Judah in Jerusalem. Yea, thus saith Jehovah of hosts, the God of Israel, concerning the vessels that remain in the house of Jehovah, and in the house of the king of Judah and of Jerusalem. They shall be carried to Babylon, and there shall they be until the day that I visit them, saith Jehovah. Then will I bring them up and restore them to this place. Jeconiah and the vessels of the house of the Lord were carried to Babylon. Now, what does this picture, this carrying away to Babylon, we did a study not too long ago on good and evil figs from Jeremiah 24. And it says in Jeremiah 24, verse 1, Jehovah showed me, and behold, 2 baskets of figs were set before the temple of Jehovah, after that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away captive Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and the princes of Judah, with the carpenters and smiths from Jerusalem, and had brought them to Babylon. 1 basket had very good figs, even like the figs that are first ripe. And the other basket had very naughty figs, which could not be eaten. They were so bad. Then said Jehovah unto me, What seest thou, Jeremiah? And I said, Figs, the good figs very good, and the evil very evil, that cannot be eaten, they are so evil. Again the word of Jehovah came unto me, saying, Thus saith Jehovah, the God of Israel, like these good figs, so I acknowledge them that are carried away captive of Judah, whom I have sent out of this place into the land of the Chaldeans for their good. For I will set mine eyes upon them for good, and will bring them again to this land, and I will build them, and not pull them down, and I will plant them, and not pluck them up. And I will give them a heart to know me, that I am Jehovah, and they shall be my people. And I will be their God, for they shall return unto me with their whole heart. And as the evil figs, which cannot be eaten, they are so evil, surely thus saith Jehovah, so I give Zedekiah, the king of Judah, and his princes, and the residue of Jerusalem, that remain in this land, and them that dwell in the land of Egypt, and I will deliver them to be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth, for their hurt to be a reproach, and a proverb, a taunt, and a curse, in all places whither I shall drive them. And this chapter, along with a great many other verses, teaches us that the carrying away into Babylon is a historical event that is true history, and yet it teaches the spiritual truth of the end of the church age, as Judah would represent the churches and congregations, and when God would come to bring judgment on the churches, when judgment began at the house of God, that he then at a later point opened up the scriptures to reveal the command to his people: go out of the church, leave the church, flee out of Judea, as we read in Matthew 24, flee to the mountains. But in the book of Jeremiah, the command is given, go into captivity to Babylon. And that is helpful. It teaches us that Babylon's a picture of the world, as Judah would be a type of the church. And the Lord's people were to go out into the world, to leave the churches and congregations, worship God as individuals outside of the corporate church. And if you do that, and of course there's more to it than that. We know that not everyone who left the church was truly saved, but all God's elect who were truly saved did leave the church. And so they're typified by good figs, and the ones who remain in the church are typified by evil figs. Good fruit, evil fruit. You can tell the fruit by its tree. The elect are the good fruit. Their tree is the tree of life, the Lord Jesus Christ. And the non-elect, or the tares, they're staying in the fig tree of the churches and congregations, as the fig tree typifies that, and they become evil fruit. And now we're fully able, at least on that level, to discern the fruit. by looking at the tree. That is, we know just from someone coming and saying, I'm a pastor. I get notices all the time from people that are missionaries for churches, pastors of churches in other countries, and they write me on Facebook, and immediately, no interest whatsoever. I try to be polite and share with them, because I know where they're coming from. The tree has been exposed, and the fruit associated with the tree has been exposed, and so there's no sense even starting out in that kind of a direction. It's an assist to us at this time. Well, let's go back to Matthew 1. And we're told again of these generations, the 14 generations, that it's Abraham to David until Jeconias, or the carrying away into Babylon, and the carrying away into Babylon to Christ. 14 generations between each of those points. And we know the starting point is Abraham. And as far as historical dates, we know when Abraham was born was the year 2167 BC. However, we also know that he was Abram at that time. And his name didn't become Abraham until he was how old? 99. God changed his name to Abraham and said the next year, when he would be 100, Sarah would have the son Isaac. And so when he was 99, that's the year 2068 BC. Where do we start? If we were to try and develop a timeline, historically, where would we start? Would it be 2167? Would it be 2068 or even 2067 when Isaac is born? And, we might think, we have to start when his name is changed to Abraham, because it says Abraham here. The generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begat Isaac. Starting with Abraham, and he had his name changed again when he was 99 in the year 2068 BC. However, do you know you do not find, or at least I couldn't find, the name Abram in the New Testament. It's always Abraham in every verse. Even when God is referring to his earlier days when he was in Haran. If we go to Acts chapter 7, it says in verse 2, and he said, Men, brethren, and fathers, hearken, the God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Charan. So before he entered into the promised land, and he dwelt in the promised land 25 years until he was 100, so I think he was 75 when he first entered in. And here God's referring to him as Abraham. Or turn to Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, and it's a similar statement in verse 8. By faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed. And he went out, not knowing whither he went. And again, that would be when he was historically in Genesis identified as Abram, but God is calling him Abraham. Or if we go to Hebrews 7, we read of Abraham giving tithes to Melchizedek. In verse 1, for this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all. First, being by interpretation king of righteousness, and after that also king of Salem, which is king of peace, and mentions Abraham a couple more times in that passage, which is telling us about events taking place in Genesis 14. In Genesis 14, Abraham goes to battle with his servants to rescue Lot. And we read in verse 18, and Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. So God, 3 times in the New Testament, calls him Abraham, when in the Old Testament, at the period of time that it's referring to, he was still Abram. Which means we cannot say, well, since Matthew 1 is telling us that to start at Abraham and go to David, that means it has to be when he had his name changed. No, and actually, I think we'll see that the Lord would have us to start with Abraham's birth in the year 2167 BC. 2167 BC, Abraham was born, and that would be the starting point of the 14 generations, from Abraham to David. And then we have a whole other question. Well, when with David? David's born 1037 BC. He becomes king 1007 BC at age 30. And that would be a Jubilee year, exactly 1,000 years before the birth of Christ in the year 7 BC. And here's David, the great type of Christ. Actually, it's almost a mirror image from that point of David becoming king in 1007 BC until he dies, and the foundation of the temple is laid in 967 BC, 40 years. And if you go 7 BC to 33 AD, when the Lord Jesus demonstrated the laying of the foundation of the spiritual temple, 40 calendar years. David, his reign spans 40 years. He dies. Temple foundation is laid in the same year he dies. The Lord Jesus enters in a Jubilee year, goes 40 calendar years. He dies. And as we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, no other foundation can be laid, as he demonstrated the things he had done at the foundation of the world. Amazing reflection of David, the great type of Christ, and the actual duration of the time Jesus spent in the world. And of course, here we are following the same pattern. 1994, Jubilee year. 2033, 40 inclusive years, which is the identical period of time from 7 BC to 33 AD. Only 2,000 years later. 1994 is that exact pattern. So do we start with David and his reign in 1007, or maybe his death in 967 BC, Abraham to David? There's some interesting numbers there from 2167 BC until the laying of the foundation, 1,200 years exactly, and in the day that David died. Or maybe it's a different number. Actually, I don't think these numbers, although interesting, that from Abraham to David, and from David to the carrying away, and from the carrying away to Christ, these numbers are somewhat interesting, but I don't think that's even the main focus of why God has given us these 42 generations. And we, as far as Jeconias, or the carrying away into Babylon, we would wonder, well, where do we date that? Did it start with 609? But since the Lord refers to Jeconias and his brethren about the time they were carried away to Babylon, we know he was carried away in 598 BC. And then the last king Zedekiah reigned for 11 years from 598 to 587. And so we can play around with these dates and adjust them and get different timelines and break down the numbers, but they're not the real significant things, I think, in what God is laying out here. Now, one other thing that we need to do is look at the reference to David. If we see that Jesse begat David the king, and David the king begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Urias. So David is the 14 generations from Abraham, then from David to the carrying away into Babylon, 14 generations. So he's central, and we know that David is also a name of the Lord Jesus, right? David means beloved. Beloved. I think it's 1732 in the Hebrew, David, and beloved is number 1730. I didn't write that down, but I think that's accurate. And it's very closely related as far as the spelling. And so David is beloved. Christ is beloved. And there's several verses, I'm only going to go to 3, that show that David is a name for Christ. If we go to Ezekiel 34, verses 23 and 24, and it will set up one shepherd over them, and he shall feed them, even my servant David, he shall feed them, and he shall be their shepherd. And I, Jehovah, will be their God, and my servant David a prince among them. I, Jehovah, have spoken it. Now, Ezekiel is being written during the captivity period, over 400 years or 300 and some years since David's died. So David is not going to be anyone's shepherd on this earth, but God says David will be shepherd, and we shouldn't think, well, in eternity future, David's going to be like a shepherd king. No, he's just a believer like everybody else is just a believer, and he might get set over 5 or 10 cities or whatever, however that works out, but that's not the idea. This is referring to the Lord Jesus, and he's calling him David. Also in Ezekiel chapter 37, Ezekiel 37,